The gavel echoed through the small claims courtroom like a gunshot. "You are telling me," the judge said, peering over her reading glasses, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper, "that your own cousin, a neonatal nurse working 80-hour weeks, liquidated her life savings to save your childhood home from foreclosure. Just as a gift?" 2-year-old Jessica stood at the defendant's podium, casually chewing a piece of gum. She adjusted her designer blazer and shrugged. "Yes, Your Honor, she felt bad for me after my mom passed. It was a gift." Across the aisle, 34-year-old Emily's hands shook as she clutched a heavy 3-ring binder of bank statements. She had lost her life savings, her credit score was in ruins, and she was currently surviving on instant ramen and stress. The woman standing 10 feet away was not just a squatter, she was blood. And she was lying with a coldness that made Emily sick to her stomach. A year ago that her act of pure, selfless sacrifice would lead to her standing in a courtroom fighting to avoid personal bankruptcy, she would have called you crazy. But in courtrooms like this one, it is a bitter, recurring truth that no good deed goes unpunished. This is the story of how a lifeline thrown to a drowning family member became a noose, and how absolute trust was repaid with absolute betrayal. It all started on a rainy Tuesday in late October. Emily's aunt, Jessica's mother, had passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack. The family's grief was overwhelming, but the financial reality left in the wake of the tragedy was far worse. The family home, a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet Ohio suburb, was 3 months behind on its mortgage. The bank had already initiated proceedings. They were threatening immediate foreclosure. Jessica, 24, perpetually drifting between part-time gigs and aspiring social media stardom, was devastated. She sat on the porch steps in the freezing rain, sobbing into her hands, terrified of being put out on the street. "I have nowhere to go, Em," she had cried, gripping Emily's jacket. "This house is all I have left of her. If I lose it, I lose my mom all over again." Emily, a practical and deeply empathetic ICU nurse, could not bear to see her cousin become homeless. Emily had been saving meticulously for 7 years to buy her own starter home. Through brutal back-to-back night shifts during the pandemic, missed vacations, and a ruthless budget, she had managed to save exactly $45,000 in a high-yield account. In a moment of profound compassion, they made a desperate pact. Emily would pay the $15,000 in mortgage arrears to stop the foreclosure debt in its tracks, and she would assume the $2,000 monthly payments moving forward. In exchange, Emily's name would go on the deed alongside Jessica's. The agreement, thoroughly documented in a series of emotional text messages, was simple. Jessica would get a full-time job, rent out the finished basement to a verified tenant, and pay Emily back in monthly installments. Once Emily was fully repaid, she would sign her half of the house back over to Jessica. It was a massive $45,000 leap of faith. For the first 2 months, everything seemed fine. Jessica sent long, tearful text messages, thanking Emily for saving her life. But when January rolled around, first agreed-upon payment of $1,000 never arrived. "I am just getting on my feet," Jessica texted, when Emily politely inquired. "The job market is so tough right now, and I am still grieving. Give me until next month, please." Emily, exhausted from the hospital and trying to be understanding, let it slide. Then February passed. Then March. Not a single dime materialized. Meanwhile, Emily was draining her own weekly paychecks to keep the mortgage afloat. The breaking point arrived in mid-April. Emily had just finished a grueling 14-hour night shift. Exhausted and acting on a gut feeling, she decided to drive by the house to check on her cousin. What she saw made her blood run cold. The quiet suburban home was unrecognizable. 6 cars were parked haphazardly on the front lawn, tearing deep muddy ruts into the grass. Heavy pulsing bass rattled the front windows. A massive, hot pink neon sign reading, "Vibiachus," was glowing obnoxiously from the living room. Heart pounding against her ribs, Emily unlocked the front door and stepped into a living nightmare. The beautiful antique furniture her aunt had cherished for decades was completely gone, replaced by cheap beanbag chairs, massive ring lights, and camera tripods. Half a dozen 20-somethings were running around the living room, throwing branded energy drinks at each other and filming videos for social media. Empty liquor bottles and fast food wrappers littered the kitchen counters. Jessica emerged from the hallway, holding a professional camera rig. She did not look guilty. She did not look apologetic. She looked deeply annoyed. "What are you doing here?" Jessica snapped, immediately turning off her ring light and glaring at her cousin. "What is this?" Emily demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of exhaustion and rage. "Where is Aunt Mary's dining table? Who are all these people?" Jessica rolled her eyes, scoffing loudly. "This is called a content house, Emily. We are influencers. You would not understand. And I sold the dining table to buy better lighting equipment." The shock hit Emily like a physical blow to the chest. While she had been working night shifts, wiping down hospital beds, and living on cheap pasta to cover the mortgage, her cousin had turned the rescued family home into a frat house. "You need to kick them out," Emily said, her voice dropping to a steel whisper. "And you need to pay me the $3,000 you owe me. Now." Jessica crossed her arms and smirked, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "Or what? It is my house. My name is on the deed, Jessica." "Yeah, well, I live here," Jessica sneered, stepping into Emily's personal space. "And you cannot just evict me. I know my rights." What followed was a descent into legal hell. Emily immediately hired a lawyer to force the sale of the property, but Jessica was ready, and her cruelty knew no bounds. She did not just refuse to leave. She went on the offensive. A week after the confrontation, Emily received a loud knock on her apartment door at 11:00 p.m. It was a uniformed police officer, serving her with a temporary restraining order. Jessica had filed a sworn affidavit claiming that Emily had violently barged into her home, threatened her life, and made her fear for her safety. Because of the temporary order, Emily was legally barred from stepping foot on the property she was paying for. She could not check off the physical damage to the house. She could not kick out the squatting influencers. And yet the bank still expected the $2,000 mortgage payment on the first of every single month. The stress began to destroy Emily from the inside out. She developed severe insomnia. She maxed out too. Credit cards just to keep the house out of default, terrified that if it was foreclosed on, her own credit would be ruined and her life savings would vanish into thin air. Every day, she saw Jessica posting videos online, laughing, partying, and doing brand deals in the very house Emily was bleeding herself dry to save. The injustice was suffocating. Every second of every day, Emily wondered, how could family do this? Finally, after 6 agonizing, financially draining months, the case went before a judge. Which brings us back to the dead-silent courtroom. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with 30 years on the bench, flipped through Emily's meticulously organized binder. Was packed with bank transfers, mortgage statements, and the initial text messages detailing the loan agreement. The paper trail was absolute and undeniable. "It's Jessica," the judge said, her voice dangerously calm. "The plaintiff has provided proof that she paid $15,000 to cure your mortgage default and has paid $2,000 a month since November. Do you dispute this?" "No, Your Honor," Jessica said, her tone dripping with rehearsed confidence. "But I do not owe her anything. It was a gift." A murmur ran through the small courtroom. "A gift," the judge repeated, leaning forward. "Yes, she felt bad for me. We even signed a document stating that the money was an inheritance gift and that she would surrender her portion of the deed to me." Jessica's lawyer stepped forward and handed a piece of paper to the bailiff, who passed it up to the bench. Emily's stomach plummeted. Her heart raced so fast she felt dizzy. She had never signed anything of the sort. Had Jessica actually forged her signature? The courtroom held its collective breath as the judge adjusted her glasses and looked at the paper. For 10 agonizing seconds, the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock. Then, judge leapt up. She did not look at Jessica. She looked directly at Jessica's lawyer. "Counselor," the judge said, her voice laced with absolute ice. "Did you review this document before submitting it as evidence to this court?" The lawyer blinked, suddenly looking extremely nervous. My client provided it to me this morning, Your Honor. I suggest you look at it again," the judge snapped, shoving the paper back at the bailiff. "Look at the date next to the plaintiff's alleged signature." The lawyer took the paper. His eyes scanned a page, and his face instantly drained of color. "Would you like to read the date aloud for the court?" the judge demanded. The lawyer swallowed hard, his voice barely a squeak. "August 14th, Your Honor." Miss Jessica, this document, which you claim proves the plaintiff gave you this house as a gift after your mother's death, is dated 14th of August. Jessica shifted uncomfortably, the arrogant smirk finally slipping from her face. "Yes, so." The judge leaned forward, slamming both hands flat on her heavy wooden desk. "Your mother died on the 12th of October. The silence in the room was absolute. Jessica's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You are trying to submit a document claiming a post-mortem inheritance gift," the judge thundered, "dated 2 months before your mother passed away." Emily let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. It was the exact same arrogant, sloppy mistake of a serial hustler. The sheer arrogance of the lie had been its own undoing, mirroring the careless hustle of a defendant trying to pass off a fake contract dated in January for a living arrangement that did not even begin until February. "That is a typo," Jessica stammered, her tough facade instantly crumbling into a pathetic panic. "I meant October." "What you meant," the judge interrupted, her voice booming through the courtroom and echoing off the walls, "was to commit blatant perjury in my courtroom in a calculated attempt to steal from the woman who saved you from the streets. This is one of the most despicable cases of betrayal I have seen in my entire career. You are a hustler, plain and simple." The judge did not just rule in Emily's favor. She brought the absolute hammer down. She immediately ordered the forced sale of the property. She awarded Emily the full return of her $45,000, plus all mortgage payments made, all legal fees, and the maximum allowable punitive damages for the fraudulent document. Furthermore, she signed an immediate, non-negotiable eviction order for Jessica and her influencer friends, giving them exactly 48 hours to vacate the premises under police supervision. 2 days later, the air was crisp and cold as Emily stood on the sidewalk outside the Maple Street house. Police cruisers were parked on the torn-up lawn, their lights flashing silently in the morning sun. She watched quietly as Jessica, red-faced, crying, and glaring, dragged 2 overloaded suitcases down the driveway. Her friends had already fled in the middle of the night, leaving the house a complete mess, but a mess that Emily now legally controlled. Jessica stopped at the bottom of the driveway, looking at Emily with pure venom. "You ruined my life." Emily did not yell. She did not cry. The exhaustion and the fear of the last 6 months had completely burned away, leaving behind only a profound, unbreakable strength. She looked at the cousin she had almost bankrupted herself to save. "No," Emily said softly, her voice carrying over the morning breeze. "I saved your home. You just could not handle the grace." As Jessica climbed into the back of a rideshare and was driven away, Emily walked up the steps to the front door, changed the locks, and finally, for the first time in a year, exhaled. The nightmare was over. The house would be sold, her savings would be restored, and she had learned the hardest lesson of her life. Sometimes, the people who cry the loudest for a life raft are the ones most likely to pull you under.